everybody. Welcome to season 4, episode 15 of A Conversation with Cometan. Of course, I'm your host, Cometan, and I'm here today with another brand new lecture, this time focusing on aspects of Astronist salvation and a little bit of theology as well that we've not quite covered yet as in much detail. So I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, as you can see, the title of today's lecture is The Degradation of Humanity. Now, of course, that might seem quite negative and a little bit foreboding as a title, but I think it does kind of capture an important aspect of the Astronist understanding of salvation and how human beings sort of exist right now and what we could be through Transcension, of course. So without wasting any more time, let's get into today's lecture. So in previous lectures, I've explored extensively the Astronist philosophy. I've explored sort of the difference between limitation and unlimitation and how this is the main sort of philosophical distinction that is made between sort of existence, you could say, the material, the sort of immaterial, and also the limited and the unlimited. And today we're kind of moving more to look at the limitation. So I spoke about this in some of my Astronism versus lectures, where a religion observes problems around it in the world, and that is the impetus for the creation of that religion, because the religion then is stating that it can solve the problems that it's observed. And Astronism's no different in this regard. Of course, the main problem that Astronists identify is limitation, limitation all around us, okay? And this problem of limitation, which is explored in limitational or limitationist philosophy, which is a branch of Astronist philosophy, it has to be, the problem has to be big enough, serious enough, grave enough, you know, the consequences of it have to be grave enough to kind of justify all this emphasis that Astronism is placing on transcension. So, of course, in a lot of Astronist discourse, we talk about transcension and how important it is and how we believe in transcension. And these are kind of like positive affirmations, aren't they, about transcension? But oftentimes we forget or maybe overlook the fact that we need to look also at the problem of limitation itself, okay? And we need to use that to kind of justify the emphasis that we're placing on transcension. So, of course, and you may find it easier to look at some of the Astronism versus videos, particularly the one Astronism versus Christianity, before you watch this lecture, just so then you've got a bit of a better understanding of Astronism if you're, you know, a new person to Astronism. But essentially, the Astronist philosophy distinguishes between sort of transcension and limitation. Okay, so there is this dichotomy between the scopic nature of human beings and the controversive nature of human beings. The scopic nature of human beings is that thing, that aspect within us that is potentially infinite, and that is what we call in Astronism our consciousness. This is the aspect of human beings. Because we are sapient species, so we distinguish ourselves from other species on this planet, we possess this quality within us. And this quality allows us to sort of grasp opportunities in the world, to be better, to overcome our limitations. It allows us to be good people. And also, of course, allows us to embark upon and to be receptive of new opportunities. primarily, of course, through the astronomical world, as we believe in Astronism. So we've got this side of human nature, which Astronism identifies, but then also what Astronism identifies is the controversive nature of human beings. And now this is the diametrical opposite of what I've just said. The controversive nature encompasses everything that limits us. So the fact that we can be cruel sometimes, the fact that we can think very narrowly sometimes, the fact that human beings can want to hold other human beings back from overcoming their limitations. So these are all limitations, of course, but they are what we call controversive. They are indulging in limitation. Okay, and the whole point of the Astronist religion is to overcome limitation, both for the individual, but also for humanity as a whole as well. And of course, Transcension is that sort of salvific journey that Astronism wants humanity as a whole, as a species, to embark upon in order to overcome our limitations, or in order to ultimately overcome this kind of controversive side of our nature. Now, Astronism views history through the lens of transcension, through the lens of these two kind of opposing forces within the human person, and as a result, identifies that for the majority of human history, the majority of humans have been controversive. They have been narrow. They have, they have suppressed new ideas, new progressive beliefs and ideas. And Astronism points to various instances in history where, and oftentimes it centers around like Giordano Bruno, for example, who was burned at the stake for his ideas about cosmic pluralism. Or even Galileo Galilei, who obviously was imprisoned and sort of suppressed by the Catholic Church for his sort of scientific advancements in astronomy. So Astronism points to some of these examples as these groups, these other religions kind of indulging in this controversive nature, trying to suppress anything that would progress the transcension. And so Astronism views the majority of human history as having been dominated by the controversity, the controversive nature of human beings. And so obviously Astronism's goal is to try to build up the scopic nature of human beings, to try and get that to overcome this controversive side. So essentially there is in the human person this kind of battle going on, and this is also taking place within the human species as well. And this battle is between limitation and scope, essentially. Okay, so, or limitation and opportunity for an alternative terminology there. So first, what endowed first was the quality of scope. Okay, this is our capacity as a result of us being intelligent. We can receive knowledge. We can perceive the astronomical world. We can believe things. We have convictions. We have visions of the future. We can imagine. Yes, this is all part of the quality of scope. And this centers around our receptivity. We are receptive to potential. Okay, that doesn't mean that we're going to harness that potential and use it for good, but it just means that we do have that capacity within us as human beings, as sapient species, that we can actually, receive this kind of opportunity. Okay, and that ultimately, if we, continue with receiving scope and harnessing it and applying it in our lives, that fundamentally we will achieve what we call potentialization. This is kind of fulfilling your not your dreams, but fulfilling your greatest potential, essentially, and that this the sort of potentialization is more about the individual, and then the potentialization of humanity is what we refer to as transcension. So there is this underlying process of potentialization, okay, which is at the heart of Astronist understandings of what salvation is. It's believed that, you know, salvation, to be saved, to save oneself, is to fulfill one's potential, to overcome one's limitations, okay? So in reaction to this potentially infinite quality within sapient beings came the pressing down of cosmic limitation. And we've always got to remember that, you know, we live in a limited cosmos here. Everything around us is limited. We are limited. The material, the natural world is all limited, and it's pressing down on us. And so, of course, in reaction to this potentially infinite aspect of the sapient person, there also has to be the limiting aspect of the sapient person, and this is what in Astronism we call controversity. This is the tendency of human beings to limit our potential, or to avert opportunity to do or be better. So of course this could possibly be seen as related to the idea of sin in a way, you know, how Christianity views, or certain branches of Christianity view human beings to be inherently sinful. Well, in Astronism, we view human beings to be inherently limited, which can obviously lead to immoral acts. But the more fundamental aspect is that Astronists, human beings are limited, both in our mind, in our body, in our interactions with others, in our ability to think and do and be. Okay, we are limited. We are limited, of course, by cosmic limitation, this sort of pervading law of limitation that seems to exist all around us, and we can observe that in our lives, of course. But specifically what controversity, or the doctrine of controversity, is saying is that human beings aren't just inherently limited, that we also have a tendency to indulge in limitation. Okay, and so this is what has caused, you know, this sort of battle between our natures to rage on, essentially. Okay, so the main thing is that we have this scopic nature, which is, for want of a better word, good, or seen as, you know, our moral side. And then we've got this controversive nature, which is seen as the immoral, or even the evil side of human beings, precisely because this dichotomy is created precisely because transcension is viewed as the ultimate goal, the ultimate value. So if an act or a person or an idea kind of regresses transcension, or moves away from transcension, or is perceived to, you know, try and stop transcension, then that would be seen as controversive, and so therefore would be immoral, because it's not progressing the human species towards the completion of transcension. Okay, so as a result of this controversity within the human being, we are a fragile humanity. We live in a fragile human state. Okay, and this sort of controversity manifests limitation in our thoughts and actions, doesn't it? And that really, as a result of this controversity, humanity exists in a state of what I call antipode to transcension. So in a state of kind of opposition to transcension. You know, we exist limitedly, but we also have this tendency to limitation. And so as a result, we are kind of opposed to transcension in a way. And so that is also used as one of the reasons why throughout human history, there has been this kind of suppression of transcension. That's one of the reasons that is given for that. It's because we have this tendency to be limited. And so because transcension is everything but limited, or certainly wants to achieve unlimitation, that kind of clashes with our tendency, or our sort of limited human nature, you could say, or our controversive nature. So, as I said earlier, the existence of controversiveness is a sort of innate part of human nature, and it's also seen as a kind of after effect, really, of cosmic limitation. This has then caused the sort of struggle within human beings, within the sapient person, between opportunity and constraint. Okay, and so this is where you can draw a few parallels, not in terms of content, but in terms of patterns and frameworks between Astronism and Marxism. Now, I know you weren't going to think I was going to say that, but there are some parallels here. Marxism begins on the sort of belief or the assumption that there is this kind of class struggle, doesn't it? And it kind of leads on from there. I won't go into explaining Marxism, but it begins with this idea that there is some kind of class struggle. Now, Astronism does also begin from that idea, because it's saying that there is a struggle within human beings. There is a struggle, there is a kind of what I call scope struggle, or a scopic struggle. This is the struggle between opportunity and constraint, the struggle between limitation and unlimitation. Okay, and obviously Astronism sees this to be the most important conflict or struggle in human existence. Obviously Marxism would see the struggle between the workers and the the lords as that being the most important struggle, whereas Astronism places its emphasis elsewhere, of course. So we've got this internal conflict, essentially, between scope or potential and controversion or limitation. And of course, this has ripple effects for society, as I've written there on the screen, namely controversion subjugating scope in society. And we've had to live through this, as human beings. We've had to live through persecuting each other, wars, discrimination, intolerance, and we continue with these troubles, don't we, in today's world, of course. And Astronism would attribute all of these struggles, all of these kind of evils, really, all these kind of inadequacies to this limitation scope or limitation potential conflict. Yeah. So to make matters worse, however, opportunity, which is a limit defying force, isn't it? It's something that defies limitation, doesn't it? We are limited, but when we get an opportunity to do something, we then become a little less limited, don't we? So it is this force that exists in the cosmos, but also within us. We have this ability to receive this force. The problem is that limit-defying force, although it may be abundant now, and we can identify it in different ways and receive it in different ways, it will not always be the case. And of course, this will cause the withering away of opportunity over time. And of course, this will lead to what we call in Astronist philosophy, we call it the starfall, which is this sort of extinction of humanity, really, the sort of end of humanity's opportunities, because it hasn't harnessed transcension. Okay, so opportunity is something that is, it may be around us now, but it isn't unlimited. Yeah, it has the potential to make something unlimited, but it isn't unlimited itself because it exists within the cosmos, which is limited. So limitation has this sort of nature to it that kind of presses down against anything that's trying to push back up against it, if you understand. You know, opportunity is trying to push back against limitation, isn't it? Whereas limitation is trying to eventually wins, doesn't it? Because opportunities they fizzle out, you know, they aren't unlimited, and so limitation will eventually win. And so what this does is it temporalizes the Astronist religion, but also specifically the Astronist endeavour of transcension. It subjects transcension to time. So there is a temporal or a time element to transcension, which is something that we do see in other religions, particularly Christianity, and some of the more kind of, I would say, more Protestant versions of Christianity place an emphasis on the fact that, you know, we need to take action now. You know, I think even the Jehovah's Witnesses as well would kind of emphasize that action needs to be taken now before time runs out, essentially. So Astronism does have that temporal element to it, which I think is a good way as well of kind of, I suppose, comparing it with other religions and specifically other new religious movements too. So as a result of this sort of limitations placed on opportunity, on scope, Astronism sees humanity as on a road really to degradation, and that fundamentally Astronism needs to kind of bring humanity out away from this fate of the starfall, away from this kind of path down degradation. But I'll explain what degradation is. So degradation is the kind of gradual devolution of humankind, okay? And it talks about how the consequences of constantly encroaching limitation will eventually, you know, overcome humanity, and we will have no opportunity left, and then we will eventually run out of resources here on the earth, and then we will eventually go extinct, essentially. So it's not a very good, a very sort of positive outlook. But the good thing is that we have transcension, which is seen as the only antidote to limitedness, the only antidote to this kind of degradation, this devolution via limitation. And so this is why in the Astronist religion, such an emphasis is placed on transcension, because it is seen as that kind of remedy, really, this remedy to our limitation, to our limitedness, both as individuals, but also as a whole species too. So we've got the degradation, which is believed to be comprised of two parts. This is a kind of process that humanity will go on, essentially. The first we have, and these are sort of consecutive. So the dissension will take place first, which describes a kind of moral and developmental decline. Some believe that we are in the dissension already. Others believe that, you know, we're not quite in the dissension yet. We are still have a lot of scope. We still have a lot of opportunity. We still, you know, we still are going towards, you know, transcension. We can still do transcension, but there are sort of aspects of Astronism that would say we are entering some kind of dissension stage, you know, with the sort of moral and developmental and progressive declines that we maybe are seeing in the world today. And some Astronists would take examples from the world today for that, to justify that position. So we've got the dissension, and then we've got the process of extinction, which is like I say, it's a process. It's not just one event, but the extinction involves kind of infighting among human beings for those limited resources that we have here on Earth. This first half of the extinction process is what is called crepusculus. This is the infighting among human beings, and maybe we're seeing that a little bit today as well. You know, nations fighting against each other for limited, scarce resources. And then we have the ultimate eventual extinction event, which is called the starfall, which will be, you know, the extinction of the human species. And so that will get rid of any opportunity for us to achieve transcension. Okay, so this, even up to the kind of crepusculus, really, there could be opportunity for humanity to turn things around and to, you know, strive towards transcension. But when we get to the starfall, that is really the end of the road, essentially. And at that point, there will be no opportunity for human beings, either individually or as a species, to embark upon, or certainly not to complete transcension. Okay, so we've got to be careful about this process that we're going through, and whether our aversion to transcension is causing this process to get worse and worse. And of course, Astronism wants to bring us away from this. It wants to change our fate away from the starfall, away from our extinction. Yeah, by embracing the opportunities of space exploration and transcension, of course. So the road to degradation is one of aversion to opportunity. It involves perpetuating limitation. It involves remaining on the single planet of Earth, which is obviously an important, you know, aspect of transcension, you know, to explore other planets and to get human beings on different planets. That's an important part of transcension, to expand our opportunities and our scope. So remaining on the Earth is seen as a kind of aversion to transcension, essentially. And then also holding to any non-cosmocentric worldviews. That is also seen as kind of going down this road of aversion, degradation, etc., etc. Non-cosmocentric worldviews would not kind of, well, it's pretty much any religion other than an astronic religion, any religion that kind of doesn't recognize outer space as being that sort of intermediary between humanity and divinity, but also any religion or philosophy that kind of focuses on hedonism or materialism, or even, you know, is even too theocentric in a way. Astronism is all about focusing on the reality as we exist in right now, which is the cosmos, and facing up to that limited reality. So it wouldn't. Astronism does oppose things like theocentrism because it sees that as placing too much emphasis on God, essentially. God is further away in Astronism. It's not as close and not as intimately involved in the sort of transcensional salvific endeavour for Astronists. Okay, so again, that could be seen as leading down this road of narrowness and sort of aversion to opportunity, etc. So Astronist orthodoxy states that humanity's current position is that we are not in the degradation, but that we are in a state of antipode or disproximation to the astronomical world and transcension. So like I said earlier, we're not in the degradation just yet, but we are still in this state of antipode, this state of, you know, disproximation, meaning, you know, aversion to transcension and distance from transcension. Of course, this will eventually lead to the degradation if we don't do something, and that's where Astronism comes in. It wants to convert the world essentially to this philosophy, and then we can avoid this terrible fate of the degradation and the starfall. Okay, so we are in this state of antipode, but we can do something about it. We still have a lot of abundant scope around us. And of course, as this lecture slide asks, how do we do this? How do we, how does the degradation take place? So aversion to scope is the cause of degradation, okay? Because averting opportunity perpetuates limitation. And when a sapient species becomes limited enough, it begins to devolve in, and obviously both mentally and physically, we begin to kind of start that kind of process of extinction, really. Yeah. So aversion to scope is seen as that kind of sort of that cause of degradation, but also the cause ultimately of extinction of the species. So it is very significant. The degradation will eventually take place as a natural process of any limited species. So what it's trying to say there is that, if Astronism hadn't come along and we didn't know about this, the importance of the sort of, well, we do know about Transcension before Astronism, but Astronism's kind of reignited Transcension. If we knew nothing about this, we would naturally, as a limited species, we would naturally go through the process of degradation and go to our extinction, okay? We would naturally do that. So that is our tendency, essentially. That is our inherent tendency as a limited species, as a limited being. We would eventually go to extinction or death, for want of a better word. But the degradation of which Astronists speak is one that emerges from an active aversion to transcension. Okay, so there is this kind of, we are aware of transcension. Yeah, we have an understanding of it, or maybe a misunderstanding of it, but we still choose to kind of avert from transcension. We still choose to sort of actively push back transcension. We want to stay here on the earth. We want to, even things like, racism or sexism or persecution of people and all the terrible things that are taking place in the world, wars and all these things, these are seen as active aversions to transcension. Okay, these are seen as active, I suppose, strategies, really, to try to keep humanity limited or even controlled in some way, but certainly limited. So one practical example is that if humanity remains on Earth and does not or fails to branch out to other planets as a part of a space expansion, then our species will be bound to the limited resources of this single planet, which will inevitably cause infighting and eventual extinction. So that is the view of the Astronists, is that, if we stay on this planet, eventually the resources of this planet are going to run out, and we will have no opportunity to then, or no time, no opportunity. I keep yawning. I don't know why. We will then not have the opportunity to, kind of achieve, but also embark upon transcension. Okay, to certainly get to other planets to use their resources, essentially. Yeah, so the nature of the degradation and the nature of transcension are opposite. The degradation, being a limited force, or a limiting force, sorry, is inevitable, while the transcension, being a delimiting force, or getting rid of limitation, is evitable, meaning that the duration of its existence is limited. Okay, I spoke a little bit about the sort of evitability of transcension in one of my other previous lectures this season, so go and take a look at one of those just to get an understanding of the evitability doctrine of transcension, because I do think it is quite important to sort of understand this part of what I'm talking about here. Essentially what I'm saying is that degradation, because it's limited or because it limits things, it is inevitable because we live in a limited reality, a limited cosmos. Transcension, because it is delimiting, it is evitable and so is therefore maybe avoided, but also, could be halted and stopped, because again, we live in this limited reality. And so there is only so much opportunity. There's only so much scope or transcension that we can sort of take in, but also embark upon, really. So the degradation is this gradual process, isn't it, of devolution. It leads to human extinction, of course, we spoke about this, but because it is not sudden or necessarily imminent, there is opportunity, though limited, for humanity to change the degradational course. So even though we may eventually enter the degradation as a species, because it isn't sudden, there are opportunities still. It doesn't get rid of opportunities or scope completely. When we enter the degradation, there is still opportunity to turn things around, to embrace transcension and to go up to the stars. This means at various different stages of the degradation, human beings will be able to redirect their worldview and action so that it embraces scope. This is in the hypothetical state if we were in degradation. So this redirection may lead to the rescope of humankind. So this is the sort of reinstitution of scope, in a sense. Of course, at the beginning of human sapience, we were endowed with scope, this quality, this ability to overcome limitation. Through the degradation, that means that we are sort of gradually losing our scope. But there can be a renewed scope. There can be a renewal, a sort of rejuvenation, essentially, of scope during even the degradation itself. And so this is what we call the rescope. This is what we call the rescope or the rescopement, which will then allow human beings to avoid the degradation and its consequences. Yeah. Of course, again, we may come back round to the degradation. We may return to the degradation again, and we may have to go through a rescope all again. So it's a little bit like, it's a cycle, essentially. And we need to try and escape that kind of cycle. Humanity could slip back into the degradation process once again. But that isn't, it probably is inevitable that we would do that, but we need to break that inevitability. Yeah, because through our scope, through our opportunity, grasping opportunity. So a rescope kind of harkens back really to the original scope of humanity and is made possible due to humanity's preferment in the cosmos, namely that the divine actively intends for Homo sapiens to achieve transcension, as evidenced by our sapience. So, the divine wants us to achieve transcension, and the way that we justify that is through the fact that we are sapient species. We have been endowed with sapience, and so that should show us that we do have this sort of preferment. We are different from other species on this planet. God does want something for us. God has put this test in front of us, this transcensional test, and it is up to us as to whether we, grab hold of that and take that forward, or are we going to, chuck that away and just continue as we are and eventually just go extinct. God's given us that option, hasn't he? That choice. I shouldn't say he there. The divine has given us that opportunity, that choice, and of course, it is up to us essentially as human beings to decide what we're going to do. And of course, that is the basis of the Astronist morality, isn't it? Astronism states that the transcension is sort of the highest, the most important thing, the process of most importance. So of course there is going to be that element in Astronism which states that it's wrong or immoral to regress or even to avert transcension. Okay, so we then also have an interesting part of the Astronist eschatology, which is called the terarch. Now, the terarch is a kind of it's a sudden apocalyptic extinction, essentially, of the human species. And this is kind of thrown about as an idea within Astronism. This idea that, okay, there is the starfall, which will eventually cause the extinction of humanity. We've got the degradation, this kind of gradual process of devolution. But there is also this sort of ever-present threat of, a sudden extinction event, something like what killed the dinosaurs. And this could also destroy humanity. And so this, again, is used as a kind of impetus, really, to get humans to look at transcension and say, we need to do this. We need to embark upon transcension to avoid the threat of the terarch. So, again, purely due to cosmic limitation rather than any wrongdoing, this cosmos is subjected to both terrestrial and extraterrestrial natural disasters. And so the terarch is an example of that. And specifically, the terarch will be understood as a kind of cataclysmic disaster on an astronomical scale. Yeah. And of course, the terarch is therefore a major threat to humanity's transcension, because if, for example, a huge comet came and destroyed humanity, that would be the end of not only humanity, but our opportunity to achieve transcension. This sort of the fulfillment of our covenant with God to achieve transcension, that would be gone. We would have no opportunity at all. And this is precisely because we remain earthbound. We remain limited and on a single planet. Yeah. So the terarch is used in a way to try to pick humanity up the bum, really, to kind of say, come on, we need to do something. Because if there was this kind of unstoppable astronomical force, then that's it for us. That's our species gone. And so, it would be very sad, wouldn't it? We would never know the true answers to existence. We'd never know the true we'll never be able to reunite with divinity, essentially. We also have, as well, as part of sort of this whole lecture, really, is what is referred to as degradational theology or degradational philosophy. It's talking about what the consequences of humanity will be if we, avert transcension and throw it away and don't embark upon it. Okay, so this is all encompassed by what we call degradational theology or degradationism. Okay, and repudiation is just one other aspect of the degradation. So the degradation, of course, is a species-wide process of devolution, but an individual version of degradation does exist. This is what in Astronism we call the repudiation. Repudiation involves forsaking one's scope to the point of unreceptibility. So I've spoken a lot about receptivity, haven't I? Being able to receive scope from the astronomical world, this receptibility, that can go, and it will go, if we are, consistently forsaking our scope, if we are consistently turning our back against transcension as individuals, against our astrosis, we will eventually run out of scope. And then a consequence of that is we will we will no longer be able to receive scope. So scope will still exist in the world, but we just won't be receptive to it. We won't be able to receive it and embark upon that scope. Okay, and so a state of repudiation means that a person has no chance to achieve astrosis, possibly except through one's direct and consistent invocation of scope via the Surosia. I spoke about the Surosia in another lecture this season, so take a look at that if you're not sure what the Surosia is. But this is entirely up to the divine intervenience and is not controllable by the individual. So, yes, even if you do exist in a state of repudiation, there is also this, well, you do have an opportunity possibly to come out of that, but it is entirely dependent upon divine intervenience. It is entirely dependent upon whether the divine grants you that scope, grants you that new opportunity, and allows you again to be receptive to scope. But at that point, you wouldn't be able to receive scope yourself or save yourself. You'd only be able to be saved through some kind of divine intervenience at that stage. So the repudiation stage is a pretty bad stage to be in, because it shows that you've become so narrow, you've become so limited, that it's a very sorry state, really. You have no recourse to getting out of that state other than through divine intervenience, which is essentially involves begging the divine, begging God for not for forgiveness, because that's not what Astronism is based on. And I think that, again, there can be some confusion between Astronist theology and salvation and Christian theology and salvation. In Astronism, we're not really begging for forgiveness, because we have a different salvation to Christianity, but there is this ability for human beings to kind of beg for, or certainly pray for, kind of new opportunity, new scope, essentially. And so that's what is oriented on, that's what orients the Astronist salvation, because scope is seen as the currency of Astronist salvation. And as I just mentioned earlier, there is this degradation theology, the involvement of the divine in this process, this otherwise natural process of degradation. So Astronism identifies that the controversion, meaning controversive thought and action when systematically organized, is so pervasive in the human world that this will lead to humanity's extinction if we don't embark upon transcension. And so human beings must connect to the divine through scope in order to avoid the degradation. So the degradation is the epitome of limitation. The nature of limitation is that it accelerates whenever it is succumbed to. So, for example, we've got to keep on fighting against limitation. This is the Astronist struggle. If you remember earlier, there's a conflict. There's a conflict between limitation and unlimitation. And we as sapient beings should constantly be fighting against limitation. The nature of limitation, though, is that if we succumb to limitation, if we indulge in limitation, it kind of takes us up, it kind of takes us over, really. It makes us rotten. It takes us over. If you think about that, when people are maybe depressed, when they don't want to get out of bed in the morning, that choice about not getting out of bed in the morning is, of course, a limiting choice, but it also shows you succumbing to limitation. Yeah, and that leads on to further limitation, because when you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to you don't interact with people, you don't want to look after yourself, you don't want to have any kind of personal hygiene, and so that can lead to further limitations. And there's this kind of sort of ugly aspect of human beings, isn't there? That when we succumb to limitation, when we kind of give in to limitation, it kind of eats us alive, really. It takes up every single part of us. And so we should constantly, the Astronist struggle is about constantly pushing back against this natural limitation that exists all around us. Yeah. So it closes in on the entity bound to it, is what I'm essentially trying to say there. And indeed, the process of transcension means to challenge this aspect of limitation by constantly trying to overcome these persistent attempts of limitation to confine existence, to confine our thoughts, our feelings, our abilities all the time. We're trying to push back against this. So the phenomenon of limitation takes up, of course, a significant part of Astronist ontology. You can take a look at that online or in, some Astronist books that I've written, because the nature of limitation is widely studied within the Astronist ontology, or the Astronist theory of being, essentially. So some have stated that the threat of degradation and starfall presents a necessary impetus for human beings to take action to progress transcension and to avoid this fate. Okay. Similar ideas, you could argue, are used in Christianity. The idea of hell or eternal damnation is, of course, used to kind of give human beings a kind of impetus, to kind of kick us up the bum, to kind of do something. We seem to need to do that, don't we? We seem to need to have this this kind of kick up the bum, essentially, to use an informal phrase there. We seem to need this. We seem not to be able to just act on our own, to know what is good for us and what we need. We seem to need this kind of push to do it, and I think, again, that's just an example of our limitation, isn't it? That's just an example of us indulging and succumbing to limitation. And so finally, the degradation therefore plays an important part in the astroeschatology, because it is the possibility of the fate of degradation that could drive human beings to take action to avoid this terrible fate. So it plays an important part as a kind of fear, really, not for any kind of forgiveness, as I said earlier, but really to make the best of ourselves, as individuals, and to make the best of ourselves as a species. And of course, that is what the whole purpose of Astronism is set to do. It's set to bring out these good parts of ourselves. And of course, Astronism suggests that the solution to the problem of limitation, to avoid the degradation, is, of course, transcension. So the deprivation of the degradation, of course, is counteracted by the glory and grandness of transcension and wondrousness of transcension as the opening up of humankind to the astronomical world. Yeah. To the realm that is going to link us to divinity, which divinity, of course, is the embodiment. I mean, even that's not the best word, because embodiment means a physical thing, but the epitome is the divine is the epitome of unlimitation, of infinite opportunity, of infinite beingness. Okay, so transcension opens that door, it opens that bridge, it opens that pathway to divinity through the astronomical world. And so that's why Astronism is considered a space religion, isn't it? So it is the central Astronist conviction, then, that human beings cannot overcome limitation nor find solutions to limitation by remaining on Earth, because that means that we remain limited. Instead, the process of delimiting humanity must take place in a realm of greater potentiality, which is regarded to be the astronomical world, as a realm both vast and wondrous. Okay, so we're getting really down now to why Astronism places such a focus on the stars and the astronomical world, outer space, which obviously some people have wondered why that is. This is why it is. It's because it's seen as a place of greater potential, greater scope. It's seen as the place where we get our opportunity and scope, as the kind of intermediary between humanity and divinity. So transcension via this process of elevation to outer space, again, is considered the antidote to limitation. I mentioned that before, and is therefore core to circumventing the degradation. It's core to avoiding this degradation. Transcension will uplift humankind away from the fate of degradation, which will always remain a threat until transcosmization. I think that's a really important point just to make out that, you know, even if we do embark upon, and I hope we do, even if we do embark upon transcension as a species and, you know, go among the stars, there will still be the threat of degradation. Transcension does not completely get rid of that threat of degradation, because we can always go back into our tendency for limitation. We have this tendency for limitation will follow us everywhere. It's within us. It's in us, and it's all around us too. So we cannot escape that until we reach transcosmization, until we actually escape this cosmos. Okay. So by embracing and manifesting the scopic nature of humanity, you know, that other side of human nature, this will work to suppress and sort of keep in check or limit, ironically limit that sort of controversive side of sort of human nature. So we need to kind of restrict and keep in check this kind of controversive side, this limiting side, because, you know, it does have this ability to kind of take over, essentially. And that's what Astronism has identified, is that, you know, the limited side of human nature seems to have taken over in the world. It's taken over individuals, and Astronism sees the world as having this kind of affliction, you know, human beings having this affliction of limitation, this affliction of controversity. And so that's why it wants to, or the philosophy, the way of life of Astronism is to try to move away from that, to focus instead on transcension and scope. Okay, so I hope there with that you've got a better understanding of the role of the doctrine of degradation in the sort of broader Astronist beliefs about transcension, and it is an important thing to remember. You know, it's an important aspect of transcension, because we often speak about, you know, the positives of transcension, and you know, we do talk about why we want to embark upon transcension, but we don't often as much talk about what will happen if we don't embark upon transcension. And so there are some really important aspects of Astronist philosophy that are addressed when we look at the degradation and the possibilities that will, or the fate that will await humanity if we continue not to, or if we continue to kind of suppress the limitation and indulge in our limited sides. So I'll stop talking now. We've got some latest Astronist books here. We've got the Astronist Statement here on the left-hand side, which was released last year. You've got the Astronist System, which is coming in 2023, fingers crossed. And then you've also got some, again, some websites there that, you know, I try to update as much as I can with all of the things that I do. Cometan.org is, of course, my official website, and there's all sorts of different things on there, because I don't just talk about Astronism. I know that I spend a lot of time talking about Astronism, but it's not the only thing that I do. I do have other research as well that is ongoing, other projects. So if you are interested in other things that I'm up to, then just take a look on Cometan.org. And of course, comment down below your thoughts and beliefs maybe about the degradation or Astronism more generally. Okay, everybody, so thank you for listening to this episode, and I will see you in the next episode of season 4 of A Conversation with Cometan. Goodbye, everybody.